Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Joker. The Joker is a grim, dark, compelling, inviting, can't help but sort of get into sort of a movie. And I sort of get why people are so fascinated by it, not just because of all the press and the word of mouth and everything, which is certainly part of it. While I was watching, I always get why people are so into this movie and they want to talk about this movie and everything like that. But ultimately, this film is very influenced by Scorsese. Like we usually have around this time of year, every year there's tons of films influenced by Goodfellas or Taxi Driver or whatever. During Scorsese's peak period seems to be a major thing for most directors. And I get that. They're incredible, amazing movies. But the thing about why Scorsese's live on to be great classics and the others sort of, don't do that is not just because they have a well-established life of being classics. It's also because Scorsese sort of understood what he was doing with that perspective and why he was doing it. And if he was going to be influenced by something like he would do in New York, other directors like Todd Phillips, who directed Joker, have chosen to do that with their films. But they don't ever really understand what they're doing entirely. I would say maybe Hustlers does, but it's more influence than something like American Hustle or this, which is overly too much influence. And this is kind of using it differently. It's very much doing it kind of in the style of late 70s Scorsese up to early 80s Scorsese. I would say, anything from Mean Streets to After Hours. Todd Phillips has never been a stylist before. He is very much, what you see is what you get. He's very cynical. He's done the Hangover movies in old school. And now we're here. In a lot of that, he doesn't really have a certain perspective for what he's doing. He's just sort of using it in a very shallow kind of a way. And that's sort of the biggest problem with this movie. Although I did actually like it and was compelled by most of it, I'd say the ending gets a little, that was the origin of that, and let's get all these things in there, and we can't, let this go too much in that direction. Sort of safeness that didn't feel very much earned, just felt like they had to do it at this point. It does feel like, in some ways, it's like a reinvention of a DC movie, but in other ways it doesn't, because you're doing the grim dark thing again, and you're just doing it maybe a much more effective way than what Zack Snyder did. But that doesn't mean it's not just about the same in terms of the kind of ethos of it, which is mostly just to go, look how grim dark I am. I found like Shazam to be much more of a break from that than this movie is. Todd Phillips isn't a great writer, he's not a great director, and he doesn't really know what he's doing with theory. It's interesting to think of him versus Adam McKay, because they both kind of come to the same point, whereas Adam McKay came from comedies, did Anchorman, he did Talladega Nights, things like that, and then he comes to a more big Oscar movie with The Big Short or Vice. He has a perspective. Whether that perspective works or not is a different thing, but he at least has one. And I don't think Todd Phillips's one was much other than, let's see how society runs this guy down, but in a very kind of singular way of him just like playing the hits of what you're supposed to do. You have Fight Club in here, you have King of Comedy in here very obviously with Robert De Niro, but also because Joaquin Phoenix's character wants to be on this late night talk show. You have countless things like that, but it doesn't feel like he's doing it for any other reason than he understands that's how you do a mental degradation kind of movie. And what kind of makes it beyond that, and what kind of ties this whole thing together and makes it feel like it could be more than he's just playing the hits, is Joaquin Phoenix. I've always found him to be a really compelling actor. He usually does really great performances, even if it was last year's You Were Never Really Here, or, The Master, and what he's done with Paul Thomas Anderson, or anything like that. But in those, you kind of like get things from his character tics that are in the script and are in the story. And in this, I feel like he's adding things to an otherwise pretty unremarkable film in terms of what it's doing. It feels like Todd Phillips got amazingly lucky, because Joaquin Phoenix almost like pushes this beyond what it would normally be. And that I kind of am fine with in a certain regard, I don't mind seeing a great Joaquin Phoenix performance. But in terms of what it's doing with the Joker as the character, it's not entirely clear about, which is sort of a problem. You should know what your perspective is on a certain character you're making a movie about. That is sort of a comic book movie rule, I would say, but in some ways, you could say, well, why do we have that rule? And I think with Joker, you look at it and go, yeah, it's an interesting character piece, but is it an interesting character piece on the Joker, the character we know? And you could say, oh, well, they're reinventing it, so they don't need to do that. But you're like, yes, you reinvent a character, but there's still like certain rules to that character. You still some truths you understand about the character. You can reinvent Batman, but he's still Batman. There's this kind of thing where it's like, did he inspire who would become Joker later, or is he the Joker? I know they won't answer that in interviews, but while I was watching it, I was like, I don't think this movie knows. And that's sort of the issue. It's like, yeah, it's being vague, and I like vague endings, but it's being vague in that way where I'm like, yeah, but you don't seem to know, and I don't think you really know what you're doing with it, and it's not placed in a way where it's like kind of mysterious. It just feels like you just didn't fill in that part of your outline. It feels like a lack of perspective, a lack of theory, a lack of theme, because they're not able to kind of like knock down who the Joker truly is. They're able to understand who this guy is and who this character is within this, and maybe, you know, that film I think works pretty well with understanding who he is, but understanding who the Joker is something different entirely. And they never really get into that as much, leaving it so wide open. I don't think this is a dangerous film, although it brings up, you know, poor versus the rich, and, you know, the people who probably find it dangerous have a lot more money than me, so fuck them. But also, I don't think this would necessarily make you want to go out and, you know, riot or kill rich people or something. I think there's probably a lot more other real life things that would make you do that before this movie. But I have noticed that theme in modern films where like basically rich people are just all evil, which is interesting, especially when it's presented by actual rich people. I don't think it's a dangerous film or anything like that. I don't think it's like the tale of the incel or something like that. I think it is just trying to tell you how these people become these like dangerous villains, and it's like kind of this whole idea, but I just don't think it really understands like what the morals of what it's doing is. It really just wants to tell you this kind of character study of the Joker, but it doesn't really understand what the point or where that character is leading and what it means in that world. And it, while kind of hinting at it at the same time. I know certain people have hated this film, and I don't think I hate it, but the more I think about it as I'm talking about it, I guess I sort of like it a lot less than when I was watching it, because I did find it actually very compelling. I was very struck by it. I was very into it. I was sitting there and being enwrapped in it, and I've definitely been there and had times where it does feel like everything's against you and you're learning more things either about your past or other people that definitely upset you. So in some ways I can definitely understand that and understanding how people are relating to it, but the whole thing with changing this character and making it into a movement and all this stuff, so are they saying like Trump is the Joker? Are they saying like Joker's this other thing? I definitely got some hints at the deplorables thing that Hillary said, but I'm like, is this like a right-wing movie in some cases, or is it like not? It's hard to be vague, I've noticed, because there's certain films that are very good at it, and you're like, maybe it means all these things, you know, and that's the beauty of it. And then there's other films where I'm like, well, you're too vague in a lot of the ways. And I don't really think of the Joker as like inspiring a movement. I sort of thought worked for like how his henchmen were, and it does sort of bother me though that it seems like this in both The Dark Knight hint at this idea of, you know, the Joker is just so evil and so crazy that people had to follow him. And I'm like, that was never in the comics. Like, he paid those people and they were like career criminals and like things like that. And I don't understand this like kind of magical power the Joker has over people that they seem to really be into. I find very strange. And I didn't like, you know, that there's scenes in this that have to be done in a Batman movie. I thought was like just a little lame. In fact, that it was very lame. I was really disappointed by it. And how much of this is playing into like DC tropes that we've seen again and again and again. But I do think it is trying to do something different and maybe push a comic book movie in a very different direction, but in some ways it's not too different from what MCU movies do or other superhero movies do, where you basically, to make a successful superhero movie, I've always thought you take a superhero movie and you kind of mesh it with another genre. And in this film's case, it's kind of like dirty, grimy, kind of New York, kind of crazy 70s, 80s films. And that is a smart idea in itself. It's just what you're doing with it isn't smart at all. And so it's like kind of the appearance of intelligence without actually using intelligence. And I understand if people really love the Joker, and if you're not familiar with Taxi Driver or King of Comedy or kind of grimy, dark New York movies, you might kind of be a lot more compelled by it than certainly I was. And I get that. And you should check out Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. But this is just really trying to make the point of its character and make you believe in them. It's trying to make its point of its characters through the most cliched ways possible. And I really wish it had done more to set itself apart rather than kind of writing all these kind of genre things in other films and kind of playing this mixed bag mishmash thing, but not doing it away for any reason other than I don't think he can imagine it any other way because he's seen those movies too many times. I feel like it's grim and dark just to like, you know, show like, you know, how dark and twisted he truly is, and I'm like, okay, I guess. But in some ways I enjoyed it, but in other ways the theory side of me knew it was pretty shallow pretty early on and didn't really like where it was going in terms of everything. The lack of trying to really say anything other than look how evil he became. And I think when you're making those films of people, you know, driving into madness, which sounds like a really cool thing, but then you're watching them like, this is scary, this is terrifying, this is weird, this is upsetting. When I look at Taxi Driver, it both shows you how disturbed he really is, but also shows you how society can let them go and how that's a lot scarier, really. And in Joker, I don't feel the same fear because in a sense he's a supervillain. And this film very much plays it in such an unrealistic way. In Taxi Driver, you know, he has that whole shootout at the end, but he felt sort of real to me, and that felt like something that would happen. He would be able to get off. He would be able to be fine in the end. He would go down that road by working 9 to 5 over and over again. And in this film, it just plays on these like weird things. Like I also wondered, like, how is he paying for his apartment? He lost his job half the movie. Maybe I'm being too literal, but I think this film's kind of overt seriousness about itself was more there to kind of remind itself of how serious it was. In a way, it felt like more of a style exercise than like a movie, but a very compelling one to watch. It presents a good hand. I think that's why you're seeing this kind of difference between critics and cinephiles and regular audiences, because maybe they're not as familiar with that. But for us that are, you can see through that and you can see that there isn't what you think is there, and what is there isn't compelling enough. It doesn't have that meaning that it almost strives for. It fails at doing that. But in terms of maybe if this was just a style exercise, I think stylistically it puts a smile on your face and leaves you and makes you realize kind of sickness of this character. But in terms of saying something about Joker or society or the planet Earth or the human race or whatever, I don't think it does that at all. It's just trying to kind of like con you into thinking it did, which maybe is the joke of the whole movie, and was the joke of Killing Joke, which inspired it, is that you'll never really know the origin of the Joker, because would he ever tell it to you at face value? And to be honest, isn't it cooler that you don't know? So if you've seen the Joker and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. I don't think you saw it, but here is my Joker shirt. Cool.